Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jenny. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode,
been at war for 2 days, and it's already raising taxes that they're going to bomb whatever they feel like.
There was no shelter anywhere. It is full-scale armored warfare.
Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Jenny, and last episode we covered September 4th through 10th, the week the war spread beyond Poland. Churchill came back into government. France launched its underwhelming Saar offensive. Canada made its first independent declaration of war, and the U-boats started hunting in the Atlantic from essentially day one. We also left Warsaw standing, but barely.
And I'm Justin. This episode, September 11th through the 15th, the war gets more complicated and more interesting. We have a near catastrophe at sea involving Britain's most famous aircraft carrier, a Polish submarine on the run, Charles Lindbergh weighing in from America, and Warsaw slowly being destroyed from the inside. Plus a couple of, meanwhile, in the rest of the world moments that I love. It's a packed 5 days.
You also told me there's a note about Ferrari in here somewhere.
There is a Ferrari story. We'll get there. So on September 11th, Monday, the British Expeditionary Force has fully crossed the Channel. 158,000 men and 25,000 vehicles have moved into France without a single German interception. That is a genuine logistical achievement, but the force is already short of equipment. A secret report that finds that of 352 anti-aircraft guns assigned to the BEF, only 152 have actually been delivered. They have none of the 48 light anti-aircraft guns they were promised. So this enormous army is arriving in France under-equipped and exposed.
And on that same day, September 11th, something happens quietly in Germany that is going to matter enormously for the Battle of the Atlantic. German cipher experts cracked the British merchant ship code. They can now read the signals that coordinate convoy meeting points, where ships gather before sailing together for protection. The whole convoy system Britain is building relies on secrecy.
And Germany now has the key. It won't immediately turn the tide, though, but it's the kind of intelligence coup that pays dividends for months. The U-boats don't have to search as blindly anymore. Meanwhile, on that same day, a German submarine stops an American merchant tanker in the Atlantic, the SSRG Stuart. It fires a warning shot across her bow, then sinks a British tanker nearby while the American ship watches, and later rescues the survivors. The Americans are not at war, yet their ships are out there in the middle of all this.
September 12th brings the first real Allied coordination of the war. The Anglo-French Supreme War Council meets for the first time in Abbeville, just inland from the English Channel on the coast of France. Britain and France are now formally coordinating their military strategy, which sounds more impressive than it turns out to be in practice, but at least they're in the same room. And on that same day, Germany quietly announces that after September 20th, private automobile use will be virtually prohibited. Every privately owned rubber tire in the country is now state property. The home front is tightening fast.
And here's a detail from September 12th that sounds almost too strange to be true. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor returned to England from self-imposed exile in France. The Duke of Windsor, for anyone who doesn't know, is the former King Edward VIII, the man who abdicated the British throne in 1936 rather than give up Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. His younger brother became King George VI, the one we talked about in episode 1, giving the famous radio address.
So the man who is supposed to be king comes home just as Britain goes to war, and the Duke of Windsor has his own complicated history with Nazi Germany. He and the Duchess had made a highly publicized tour of Germany in 1937, met Hitler, and the Duke made admiring comments about what the Nazis had accomplished. There were genuine concerns in the British government about where his sympathies lay. His return to England during wartime was watched very carefully.
He'll be given a minor military appointment and eventually shipped off to be the governor of the Bahamas, far enough away that he can't cause trouble. But the fact that the former king with Nazi sympathies is coming home just as Britain declares war on Germany is one of those historical footnotes that sometimes goes unnoticed.
Canada, meanwhile, is already paying for the war. On September 12th, Canada introduces its first war budget, a new 20% surtax on personal income, plus tax increases on alcohol, tea, coffee, and cigarettes. They're forecasting a deficit of $156 million for the year. Canada has been at war for 2 days, and it's already raising taxes on tea. That's commitment.
While the diplomatic and political machinery cranks up in the West, Warsaw is being systematically destroyed. By September 13th, the city is surrounded. The descriptions from this period are some of the most harrowing of the entire campaign. The American ambassador to Poland, Anthony Drexel Biddle, is filing reports back to Washington. He writes that German forces are taking advantage of every opportunity without regard to the danger of the civilian population, and that German bombers are releasing their bombs even when they are in doubt as to the identity of their objectives.
That's a diplomat's careful language for saying that they're going to bomb whatever they feel like. By September 14th, the picture inside Warsaw is devastating. The Jewish quarter has been heavily bombed by dive bombers and artillery fire. Water mains have been ruptured by shell fire. Food is so scarce that around 700 horses are being slaughtered every day for meat, including prize Polish thoroughbreds. Shells are falling at a rate of 2 per minute. The royal castle has been hit. The electrical power plant has been destroyed. There's a fine dust of wind-blown rubble and smoke over the whole city.
And on September 13th, a shell hit St. John's Cathedral in Warsaw during Mass, killing many of the worshippers inside. That same day, the stained glass windows of Notre Dame in Paris are being removed for safekeeping. The culture of an entire continent is under threat, and everyone knows it.
At the same time, the Polish army outside Warsaw is still fighting. The Battle of the Bruzra that we mentioned last episode, the Polish counteroffensive along the river, is reaching its crisis point. On September 12th, in an effort to protect Warsaw, Polish troops to the east of the capital actually push the Germans south of Kutna and recapture the town of Wołyń. For a brief moment, the counterattack is succeeding, but German encirclement is tightening. Army Group South has destroyed a Polish force at Radom, straight south of Warsaw, taking 60,000 prisoners, the remnants of 5 divisions. The numbers are just brutal.
And the 11th Polish Infantry near Przemysl, in the extreme south end of the country, has been reduced to barely 6 battalions, each with no more than 300 men. One soldier's account from the period describes German planes raiding at frequent intervals. There was no shelter anywhere, nothing but the accursed plain. The soldiers rushed off the road trying to take cover in the furrows, open fields, no cover, constant air attack. That's what the Polish infantry was enduring while the rest of Europe argued about war cabinets.
France formed its war cabinet on September 13th. Prime Minister Daladier reshuffles his government specifically to project national unity. Several members of his new cabinet, he notes, had until recently been convinced that France must stay out of the war at all costs. He's trying to build a coalition behind a conflict that half the government didn't want. Meanwhile, the Saar offensive, France's actual military contribution so far, has pushed about 5 miles into Germany on a 15-mile front and stopped cold at the lightly defended Siegfried Line. German defenses meant to stop such an incursion. France doesn't even probe the defenses before stopping.
The French had claimed their pressure forced Germany to transfer 6 divisions from Poland to the west. British observers received that claim with what the historical record politely calls skepticism. The more likely explanation for any German movement west is that Poland is collapsing fast enough that those divisions are no longer needed there. The French aren't pushing Germany back. Germany is finishing its work in Poland and starting to look west.
Now for a story Justin has been looking forward to. September 14th, and one of the greatest near misses of the early war. HMS Ark Royal is one of Britain's most modern and famous aircraft carriers. On September 14th, she receives a distress call from a merchant ship, the SS Fanod Head, which is being chased by a German submarine about 200 miles away. Ark Royal launches aircraft to help.
While she's doing that, another U-boat, U-39, spots Ark Royal and fires 2 torpedoes. This is the kind of moment that could have changed the war this early into the fight. The Ark Royal is a prime target. Losing an aircraft carrier 2 weeks into the war would be a catastrophic blow to the Royal Navy's prestige and capability. Lookouts spot the torpedo tracks. The carrier turns toward the attack, narrowing her silhouette as the torpedoes rapidly close the distance. To the relief of those on board, the torpedoes explode harmlessly ahead of the ship.
The 3 destroyers escorting the carrier immediately turn and hunt U-39 down. They drop depth charges, force the submarine to the surface, and capture all 44 of her crew. U-39 is the first German submarine to be sunk in World War II. The attack failed because the torpedoes had faulty magnetic pistols. They detonated prematurely rather than under the hull of the ship, where they would have caused the most damage. Bad German torpedo technology saves the Ark Royal.
But the story gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. While all this is happening, Ark Royal's aircraft have reached the Fanad Head. They find the merchant ship already in the hands of a German boarding party. The British planes, Blackburn Skuas? I'm not sure. An ugly carrier-based fighter bomber attack the U-boat that's boarded the ship. 2 of the Skuas crash, caught by the blast of their own bombs. The U-boat rescues the downed British pilots. I almost called them German. The downed British pilots picked up its boarding party and then torpedoes the Fanad Head anyway. So in one afternoon, a carrier is nearly sunk. The first U-boat is destroyed, 2 British pilots shot down and rescued by the enemy, and the ship they went to save gets sunk regardless.
That's a lot of things going wrong simultaneously. And it tells you something about how chaotic the early naval war was. Nobody had really practiced any of this at scale. There's also a wonderful bureaucratic footnote from this week. An American journalist named John Gunther asks the British Ministry of Information for a copy of the leaflets the RAF had been dropping over Germany. He's told, no, this text is classified because it might give useful information to the enemy. When Gunther points out that 2 million copies had already been dropped over Germany, the official just blinks and says, yes, something must be wrong there.
The Ministry of Information in the early war is one of history's great organizational disasters, staffed, in the word of a contemporary MP, by duds at the top. They will get better, but it takes a while. September 15th brings 3 stories that each go in a completely different direction. Let's start with the Polish submarine Orzel. When the war broke out, Orzel was at sea and couldn't return to a Polish port. They were all under German attack. So she puts into Tallinn, Estonia, looking for a safe harbor. The Estonian authorities, under pressure from the German embassy, intern the submarine to prevent her from putting out to sea again. They confiscate her charts, her torpedoes, and her ammunition.
Estonia is officially neutral, but the German embassy has enough influence to get a Polish warship effectively grounded. The Orzel's crew are essentially prisoners. This is going to become important later, when the Soviet Union is looking for pretext to pressure the Baltic states. Estonia's inability to properly intern a belligerent vessel will be one of the excuses they use. A submarine trying to find safe harbor becomes a piece in a much larger game. We'll come back to Orzel in a future episode because what happens next is remarkable.
Also on September 15th, Charles Lindbergh makes a nationwide radio broadcast in the United States. In 1939, Lindbergh is one of the most famous men in America. He made the first solo nonstop transatlantic flight in 1927, and he was a genuine national hero. He also lost his infant son to a kidnapping in 1932, which was one of the most covered crimes in American history, and it drove him and his family to live in Europe for years. While there, he visited Nazi Germany, praised what he called their sense of decency, called Hitler undoubtedly a great man, and accepted a Nazi decoration, the Service Cross of the German Eagle.
So when Lindbergh gets on the radio on September 15th to urge American isolationism, he's not coming from a neutral position. He says, quote, "It is madness to send our soldiers to be killed as we did in the last war if we turn the course of peace over to the greed, the fear, and the intrigue of European nations. We must not permit our sentiment, our pity, or our personal feelings of sympathy to obscure the issue, to affect our children's lives. America has little to gain by taking part in another European war." End quote. And in the same week, more than 1 million pieces of mail flood Capitol Hill, urging Congress to vote against selling arms to the Allies.
Lindbergh's speech is the most prominent voice in a national movement. America's isolationism isn't just politicians being cautious. It's a deeply felt, popular sentiment rooted in the memory of World War I and the belief that European problems are not America's problems. President Roosevelt wants to help Britain. He cannot yet do it openly. That tension is going to define American foreign policy for the next 2 years.
Britain's home front this week gives us a picture of ordinary life adjusting to war in real time. There are no weather forecasts anymore. The government has suspended them because weather information could help German bombers navigate. About 2,000 city schools have been requisitioned for civil defense use, leaving 1 million children with nowhere to go to class. Petrol rationing was supposed to begin on September 16th, but it had to be postponed because motorists drained every pump dry trying to stock up before the rationing started.
On September 14th, Igor Sikorsky makes the first tethered flight of his VS-300 helicopter in Stratford, Connecticut. This has nothing to do with the war. It's just a man in a flying machine hovering a few feet off the ground in a field while the world burns. But the helicopter will eventually become one of the defining military technologies of the 20th century. And it starts here, in September 1939, almost entirely unnoticed.
And on September 13th, Enzo Ferrari founds Ferrari in Italy. The company that will eventually become the most famous sports car brand in the world is being incorporated while the Polish cavalry is fighting for its life. History happens everywhere at once, which is the whole point of this podcast.
And on September 15th, on the other side of the world, a war that most people in Europe don't even know is happening comes to an end. The Soviet Union and Japan sign a ceasefire agreement at a place called Khalkhin Gol, or Namonhan, depending on whether you're reading Russian or Japanese sources, on the border between Mongolia and Manchuria. This has been a full-scale, undeclared war going on since May.
Hold on, back up. The Soviet Union is already fighting a war in Asia while all of this is happening in Europe?
It's part of the beginning of World War II question, but it is full-scale armored warfare. Japan has been pushing into Mongolia, which was a Soviet client state, and by May 1939, the fighting had escalated into something neither side officially called a war, but which involved hundreds of tanks, aircraft, and artillery on both sides. At its peak, it was one of the largest armored engagements in history up to that point. The Japanese 6th Army throws everything it has at Soviet and Mongolian forces throughout the summer.
So, what happened?
The Soviets sent a general named Georgy Zhukov. He's about 42 years old, relatively unknown outside the Red Army, and he proceeds to run one of the most tactically brilliant operations of the entire pre-war period. In late August, the same week Germany invaded Poland, Zhukov launches a massive encirclement attack that completely destroys the Japanese 6th Army. Roughly 18,000 Japanese soldiers are killed. The force is annihilated, and Japan suffers the worst defeat it has experienced in modern times. The ceasefire on September 15th is Japan formally acknowledging that it has lost.
And the reason this matters enormously for Europe is that it frees the Soviet Union to look west. With the Japanese threat neutralized on its eastern border, Stalin no longer has to worry about a two-front problem. He can concentrate fully on what's happening in Poland and the Baltic states. Remember Zhukov's name? He is going to appear again in this war in much bigger circumstances.
Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Pravda is running an anti-Polish propaganda campaign blaming Poland's military debacle, as they called it, on its brutal treatment of its national minorities, its Ukrainian and Belarusian populations. That framing is not accidental.
It's laying the ideological groundwork for what's coming. The Soviet Union and Germany signed a non-aggression pact in August, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and it contained a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. The eastern half of Poland was designated as a Soviet sphere. Pravda, calling Poland a failed state that mistreated its minorities, is the propaganda preceding an invasion. We'll cover that in the next episode, because on September 17th, the Red Army crosses the Polish border from the east. So, where does this leave us at the end of the second week of the war? Well, Warsaw is being slowly destroyed, shelled 2 rounds per minute, its people eating horses. The Berezura counteroffensive is fighting its last battles. Britain nearly lost its most famous aircraft carrier, then sank the first U-boat of the war within hours. A Polish submarine is trapped in Estonia. America is listening to Lindbergh. A war in Asia that Europe barely noticed has just ended, freeing Stalin to look west. And somewhere in a field in Connecticut, a helicopter is hovering for the first time.
And the Soviet Union's getting ready to move. Next episode, September 17th, the Red Army invades Poland from the east. Poland is now being attacked from two directions simultaneously by the two largest land armies in Europe, and the rest of the world, which has spent 2 weeks figuring out its response to one invasion, will have to figure out what to do about a second one. The answer mostly is nothing. But the reasons why are complicated, and we'll get into all of it. Thanks for joining us for episode 3 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then.